Right. It looks like we are officially live. Hello, everybody. Joshua Hatton with ImpEx Beverages, and I'm here today launching the latest in the ImpEx Beverages Distillery Deep Dive series. I don't know why I couldn't remember that just now. It's really easy. We call it the 3D series. If you remember from last year in 2020, the series ran for about 14 or 15 weeks, and we kind of focused on a single distillery or a single brand at a time. This time around, we're actually inviting many guests at the same time, so we can have a larger conversation around different categories of spirits. And for each event, I will always have Sam Filmus and Chris Uhde with me, and I'll be introducing them shortly, as well as the other guests. Today but before I do, today we're going to be talking about single malt Scotch whiskey, focusing on the brands within the ImpEx portfolio. 2 weeks from now, oh geez, I got to look at my calendar for this one. There we go. Then on April 21st, we'll be looking at the Umeshu's gins and rums in our portfolio. On May 5th, we're going to be looking at world whiskeys. So Milk and Honey, Penderyn, Golden Corrales, brands like that. And then on May 19th, we'll be focusing on Japanese whiskeys, Oishi, Fukano, Kodayoshi, etc. And then finally, on June 2nd, we will be doing an event on independent bottlers, so Single Malts of Scotland, Single Cask Nation, and a couple of other treats that we may touch on in today's event. But before we get into today's event, let me introduce Mr. Sam Filmus and Mr. Chris Uhde from ImpEx. Hey, gents.
Hello, hello.
How are you guys doing? All good in the hood? All right, cool. Well, thank you guys for supporting me in this series. It was nice having the one-on-ones last year, but I feel like I have a team, and I kind of feel as if I need a team this time around because we're talking to so many people. So I'm going to start introducing our guests, and just so I'm not showing favoritism, I want everybody to know that I'm doing it in an alphabetic manner, not alphanumeric. It'd be strange if anybody had a number in their name, so I'll just do it alphabetical. We've got Mr. Alex Bruce from the Ardnamurchan distillery. Hello, sir.
Good morning. How are we all?
A little more awake than you, I think.
I'm wide awake.
Well, welcome. We're really happy to have you here, and thank you for staying up at all hours to be with us.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. The next guest will be Ollie Chilton of Elixir Distillers. Mr. Chilton, how are you, sir?
Good morning, afternoon, evening. That's the one.
Sound like Truman from the Truman Show. Good morning, good evening, and good night. Who else do we have? Oh, here we go. Mr. David Keir of the GlenAllachie Distillery. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, Josh. Good morning or good evening from Edinburgh, Scotland. I'm glad Ollie and Alex are awake and alive and kicking with it. So lots of energy from them already. I will try and keep up.
Well, you all look bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Well, yeah, at least bushy-tailed.
Because it's snowing, so we all went outside and stood there in the snow.
I got a haircut today. The first one in like 6 months.
Oh, you're all flash across the border with your haircut.
Braggart. Ooh, I got a haircut, Mr. Fancy.
I haven't had my cut yet, Alex, and you can probably tell. So coming soon.
Speaking of people who recently got haircuts, we've got James Wills from Kilchoman in the house.
Yeah, just been in hair and makeup, ready to go.
Well, pleasure to have you, James. Are you calling from Islay or are you calling from Edinburgh?
I could lie and say I'm at one of them, but I'm actually in Northern Ireland. I'm at my in-laws.
right.
Gosh, James, I'm going to tell Nicola about you.
What rules, huh? I didn't know any rules.
And then finally, adding to the group, we have the good Ralfy. And I was
Hello,
thinking,
Joshua.
how are you, sir?
Oh, wonderfully well. Thank you for asking. And underneath the bonnet, my hair doesn't need cut just yet. We're fine. We're soldiering on. And it's lovely to be joining you, gentlemen, for a wee malt moment.
Pleasure to have you. Pleasure to have everyone here. This is exciting. I've been looking forward to this. And, just to show everybody who's watching that, the whiskey industry is such an unusual industry in that, typically speaking, we all get on with one another, right? We all look to support each other and help one another out. And this is my first pour in honor of today. James had helped me secure these bottles, but how cool is this? I've got a bottling that is a cask of Kilchoman and a cask of Ardnamurchan together. It shows you that distilleries can work together. We all play nice in our sandbox. So cheers, gents. Happy to have you.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me.
So as you guys know, and as those who are watching know, this is, obviously we're going to be focusing on single malt Scotch whiskey. That is sort of the topic that we'll be basing the conversation around. But it's also a bit of a Q&A session as well. And I've tasked Ralfy to come with some questions. I'm sure he's got some hidden in his back pocket there. But I'm also tasking, geez, did I put you on the spot, Ralph? Oh, you needed your other pair of glasses. So let's get the questions.
I'm just wondering if I've got the right email here. Topic of discussion. Yes. Oh yeah, I've got. I tell you what, I'll think of something. Don't worry. The show must go on, Josh.
Beautiful. But also, I'm going to ask everyone who's watching on YouTube and on Facebook. If you have some questions, please post them. I'll be looking at the comments. And I think, do you guys have access to the comments? Do you see them?
Yeah.
You do. Okay. So listen, if you see any questions in there that I may have missed that you want to touch on, please get my attention and let me know, because I want to make sure that questions are being answered. But I wanted to kick off the conversation with a question that's been rolling around in my brain. As importers, ImpEx Beverages, we focus on independent brands, independent distilleries, and we're really proud of the fact that is our focus. And now I know what that means to us, but I wonder what independence means to you as distilleries, as brands. How does that inform how you work as a distillery and how you present your brand from the standpoint of independence? And I'm gonna pick on someone because he looks very attentive. David Keir. What are your thoughts on that question?
Josh, that's a great question. I think, and it's particularly relevant for someone like myself. I've had the pleasure of working with a few great, absolutely fantastic distilleries at distillery groups that lost their independence, if that's want of a better of a word. One in Isla, and of course my old company, Benmere, as well. Independence for GlenAllachie, where we are now, simply means freedom. And by that, what I mean is, if we want to do something, we can do it very, very quickly. I can sit down and have a conversation with Billy, or more often, he'll sit and have a conversation with me, and he will say, David, I've found some fantastic casks. This is ready to go. Let's do it. And we can, COVID exceptions, because that's put a lot of delays, but out with that, we can bring something from an idea, from a concept, to a bottle in around 4 months. 3 months even is our best. So it's just absolute freedom to bottle the whiskey when it's absolutely perfect, when it's ready.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you. Only because David mentioned his name, James. What does independence mean to? See, this is what happens. I'm gonna look for these clues, and you can use them as weapons. I just want you to know. Just throw out a name, and I'll be calling on that person. You can weaponize people's names. James, what does independence mean to? Does that idea shape how you bring Kilchoman into the market, or how you guys work?
Well, these guys, the other guys that on this call, they probably have a little bit more independence than I do, because Kilchoman, I don't often feel that independent with my father acting like a mini dictator. But yeah, I mean, similar to David, David makes a very good point that he probably has a better perspective on it than me in many ways, because I've only ever worked at Kilchoman, for my family. So we have a degree of independence within the rule of my father, but he controls things, and I guess that's the thing. He can make any decision he chooses on any given day, and often he does that, and we have no idea what's coming next a lot of the time. So and it means we have control as well, so any harebrained idea that comes to us, we can go out and do it if it's possible. So yeah, it's the freedom to do what you want on any given day.
That's very cool. And Alex, with Ardnamurchan, granted, the Adelphi side of things, that's independent bottling. That's a completely different conversation. But when it comes to Ardnamurchan distillery, granted, you're much newer than GlenAllachie. Well, not as a brand, but as a distillery, you're much newer. Has that shaped your thought process on creating whiskey, on forging your way with your brand?
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo what David said about freedom and flexibility and speed. I remember the board meeting in 2007, I think it was, when I had a piece of paper, scribbled some notes on it, and I'd got to this kind of stage where Adelphi was growing nicely, but it was going to be hampered fairly severely by lack of stock, because demand had overtaken supply. So we would never get beyond a certain point. And the board meeting was to concentrate on ideas for what next, kind of thing. And I think we came up with 3 ideas. One was to try and buy a distillery. One was to build a distillery, which we did. And the other one was just to lock ourselves in our warehouse and drink the remaining stock. And that was actually quite tempting at the time. But and then, having done that, I then got to travel around, and the likes of Anthony and Kathy at Kilchoman were fantastic. They opened their doors to us. They told us exactly what not to do. And that kind of independence, that ability to have friendship with other people within the industry very quickly, it's hugely important.
Yeah, that's I remember, and actually, Alex, you and I talked about it a week or two ago. I remember having a conversation with Anthony Wills, and him telling me that he's become this sounding board, right? People coming to him, starting a distillery. Basically, what mistakes have you made? What can we learn from? And he's been very generous with his advice.
You needed to be quite generous, because there were quite a lot of mistakes, I think, weren't there, James?
Yeah. Three of them were probably, employing his children 3 times in a row. So try and avoid that if that's coming your way, Alex.
Yeah, I think that Kilchoman was a little early.
I'm going to throw this question, excuse me, to Ollie, but I'm going to change it up a little bit, because Ollie's coming to us not as a distillery, though. Fast forward a few years, and that comment will be maybe different. Who knows?
We take a long time to do pretty much anything, Joshua. So just.
When it comes to Port Askaig, this is you're independent bottlers, though an independent brand, but in an unusual way, you are dependent on distilleries to grow your business because you're bottling the spirits that they produce. So, as an independent brand, how does the thought of codependence on these distilleries affect you, if it affects you at all?
I guess you have to be nice to everybody. It's a bit like your children want feeding, so they're nice to you. But as everybody in the room, and not everyone here listening, has met Sukhinder, they know that he's not always dependent, and not always nice. I don't know. It's interesting because I think in some ways I relate to everything that was said before in terms of the independence of being family owned and being able to move quite quickly. I think as a bottler, you're able to do that. We probably ebb and flow with the industry a bit more. I guess if you're a fully independent distillery, and we don't have this experience, the guys here probably be able to give a better view on this. You're responsible for marketing just your product, and that can go up as you do a really good job, probably not completely dependently of the whiskey industry, whereas our fate is completely tied to the ups and downs of the industry, ironically probably in reverse. So as the whiskey industry gets more popular, our supplies get more tricky, and as things get more difficult, our supplies get a lot easier. So as long as blends keep going down, I'm a happy man, because I get more stock. And as more companies become independent, it probably gets more difficult because people like Anthony will only sell to us once before getting very grumpy. Shouldn't make things so popular, damn it. Yeah, so I guess that's the main difference, being a dependent bottler, which I actually like. I really like as a term. I think we're just going to change everything to being a dependent bottler.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. And what you said, I hear that from every independent bottler. When the whiskey boom, when it starts to hit a trough, independent bottlers are doing a little better, and it just kind of ebbs and flows. But like you had said, sort of in reverse. I'm going to pose this question to Ralfy.
Hello.
Hello.
How can I help you?
What does independence mean to you? I mean, you've been doing independent whiskey reviews for I think this is your 11th year now, maybe going on your 12th year, if I'm not mistaken. I could have my math wrong.
12 years is a long, long time online. I kicked off in 2009 when there were far fewer reviews and far fewer reviewers. And it really was uncharted territory for the whiskey industry collectively. And I think that people were kind of relatively slow to catch on to it because traditional marketing tends to have a specific way of approaching things. So I was quite fortunate in being a member of Glasgow's Whisky Club and knowing people connected with it who came along occasionally to give us presentations and tastings and all the lovely stuff. Like, for example, David. I learned a huge amount from being associated with the Whisky Club, and I could take it online and simply present it as an opinion. Importantly, I had quite a lot of bottles of whiskey, so I wasn't trying to solicit free samples from the industry. And quite by accident, that's kind of really worked, because I think that successful commentators, and I use the word carefully here, onliners are not experts. There's people like Charlie McLean and Dave Broom who are experts and have expert knowledge. And I think that onliners, enthusiasts, and anoraks are kidding themselves on if they think they're going to be an expert or taken seriously as such. But to give an honest opinion and to be perceived quite reasonably as being independent in the information you give carries a lot of currency. And it's worth noting that after 12 years, my audience continues to grow online, whereas many other onliners, whatever the subject, who came in at the beginning, have either burnt out, been overtaken by more heavily edited and well-rehearsed video makers. But the online whiskey scene is really interesting because it's so polite and civil and well-behaved, and you don't have the sort of whole-scale bitching sessions that you get with, say, the fitness industry community, or fashion. And the level of interaction, particularly with comments being left, are really quite well informed. And it's worth noting that you get a bird's eye view online as to how the international and the globalization of whiskey culture is really bringing people together in a very interesting communion, and remaining independent and encouraging folk to be independent in whatever they do is a major advantage. It doesn't look at it in the short term, but in the longer term, when you see the way things are morphing within the whiskey scene, it's very interesting times, and things are moving so fast.
Yeah, really, some really well said comments there, and people are popping up agreeing with what you're saying. That's great. Got an amen, Ralfy, from Monique Huston there. Mr. Sam Filmus, what does being independent mean to you as an importer? Because right, ImpEx is a small independent company. It's owned by you and Chris, and you specifically focus on independent brands. So obviously, it seems to hold a meaning to you, and I wonder if you could share your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Joshua. Well, speaking after Ralph's great comments, it's like singing after Luciano Pavarotti, but I'll try to do my best.
You don't want to hear me sing, mate.
I miss your cask. Usually I see you. Oh, there we go. It's there now. I see. From the beginning, both JVS Imports and ImpEx Beverages have stayed as far away from corporate walls as only possible. I give my guys freedom to do whatever they want, as long as they bring the sales and represent the brands and the company in the right way. The same philosophy comes to our suppliers. I love working with independent distilleries, bottlers, because we have the freedom. I can call James Wilson, just ask him to create some specific small batch that is exclusive to the US. By the time I hang up, you got it, Sam. Call Ollie and say, Ollie, do you have anything like very special? He goes, yeah, Sukinder Singh's got something from his private stock. You got a cask of it. We can exchange, numberless number of emails with David Keir, and he would get me the cask that I think is best out of 50,000 they have at that moment for the US market. And he would put the ImpEx logo on the bottle, on the box. Go, Alex Bruce. Well, Sam, we're going to have something very special for the US. Exclusive, small batch, single cask. If I like something from his Mortlach, but it's only 17 years old, he would keep for me before it becomes 18. Same with Ollie. He kept one cask for 1.5 years. Just wanted to make sure that it's ready to go and it's 40 years old. I can go on and on and on. What I'm trying to say with that, this independence we get from this smaller or independent distilleries, suppliers, you will not be able to get it from big corporate distilleries organizations. So that's basically allows us to bring these unique expressions to the consumer on this level.
Chris, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
The epitome of independence is signified in the picture that you see before you, where you have three guys from the same company who all use different punctuation to emphasize the company they're with. That's all I have to say about that.
Well said. That's funny. One thing that I want to mention here, though, I think, talking about independence and talking about all of the positive things about it, one could say, well, the implication there is that being corporate and being owned by major conglomerates there's a negative to that. And so I wonder, in a dream world, or maybe not a dream world, but do you see, what are the positives in your mind for brands that are owned by larger corporations? And let me put my own thought out there just to get the ball rolling. With Diageo and their classic malt range, right? Such a great way to get people into the category of Scotch whiskey. When they did all the Game of Thrones, crossovers, like it or not, they're getting fans of Game of Thrones into whiskey, a potential new market, right? So it sounds like a weird thing, but in a way, they're getting people into Scotch whiskey. And if that's their foot in the door, cool, then maybe they're going to find Kilchoman. Maybe they'll find Ardnamurchan and GlenAllachie and Port Askaig and so on. So what other positive, and I feel like I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but do you think there are any other positives to larger brands and what they could be doing for the Scotch whiskey industry writ large?
I'll go with that one, Joshua, because I've got a bit of experience in both of them. I was working as a retailer when the classic malt range was launched. I think it's absolutely right. It's easy to take a pop at the big guys, at the conglomerates, etc., but they do a huge amount of good work behind the scenes and growing the category overall. I don't want to sound like a marketeer, but they get people aware of whiskey. I think Diageo, for example, right now is going to put a little bit of weight behind blended malt, for example, which is a category of style of whiskey that people maybe not quite too sure on. So Diageo will put the resources that they have into educating the consumer, making them aware of the opportunities that they can enjoy with this style of whiskey, with this category of whiskey. And then that filter, it broadens the consumer knowledge. And you're absolutely right. Then the consumer, the man in the street, the woman in the street progresses on, and then they'll find us as a smaller independent, the Ardnamurchans, the Kilchomans, etc. So we benefit from the investment of these companies. And just quickly to go back to something I said earlier about the constraints of working for a big company. The people at Remy and at Brown-Forman that I worked with when they bought Brewery and Ben Clondonach, absolutely fantastic people. There's some great vision there, some great ideas, the love for the brand, love for the whiskey. But the only thing what I was trying to touch on, they're constrained by the big company policy. So they get put in a little bit of a straitjacket, and sometimes they can't maximize opportunity. And I can see that frustration for them as well. But I enjoyed my time at Remy Cointreau and Brown-Forman very much. But I'm glad to be back with an independent. And one other thing while I've got the camera, Sam, see this logo we put in your single cask? That causes me no end of grief with all our other customers, because you are the only person that gets to put your logo on our labels. So it causes me a lot of hassle, but I'm glad we did it for you, and I'm glad you like
it. That's fantastic.
I guess, Joshua, the difference though is motivation. So a big corporate company's motivated by their quarter figures, right? They have to report to their shareholders that they're all making money. There was a really interesting talk on exactly this for independent company versus a big corporate company and the benefits. And the benefit, you have a lot of longevity in a big corporate company because they're looking at the quarterly figures. But from an individual whiskey or brand point of view, you know, to Diageo, if whiskey drops off the map, they've got vodka, they've got gin, and they'll just move to the next thing, which is probably reflected a little bit, not entirely, but reflected in a lot of the staff at those companies. I'm not saying everybody, but there'll be a lot of people for whom it's just a spirits category. It's just within what they do. They could be working on Bailey's today, Johnny Walker tomorrow. I certainly think, whereas if you're an independent business, you're obviously completely focused on your brand, on building your company. So your perspective is different. That's not good or bad. That's just a reality. A company like Diageo employs millions of people across the world, or essentially puts money in pockets of millions of people across the world, some of which get to do something they love, which is great. But that's not it's just about the motivation and your individual company's motivation for doing what you do.
Yeah, I think there's a case for, I mean, I worked for Diageo, not on the whiskey side, but on the wine side some years ago. And there's certainly a case in the whiskey industry in Scotland. We're very lucky to have the big guys. They are the cogs in the machine of the industry. And, you know, they provide basically competition within the supply chain, whether it be maltsters, whether it be packaging, you know, all of the volume that you get from the large players is helping the small guys as well. And you just have to look around the world at some of our friends in the industry in other countries, and just look at, you know, where they have to pitch their whiskies in terms of cost, because they don't have that base level that the large guys help us set in Scotland.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. If there aren't any further comments on that, I wanted to go to some of the questions that were coming in, but I don't want to cut anyone short here who had anything else to add. Also, I'm curious, Ollie, what you're about to pour, because I need to pour something as well.
So I'm actually also pulling Killard, but that was because I very sadly made one, because I had a bottle of the Kilchoman Fino, which was absolutely brilliant. I spuriously opened one on the basis of the casks and went, I'll try that, and then I bought one. So I just finished that, and then I had the most recent Ardnamurchan, and I thought, you know what, I'll just try them together and see what happens. The answer is it wasn't as good. So don't do that.
Well, I'm gonna make Sam real jealous here, and I'm gonna pour a little GlenAllachie 25. I've got 10 years on you, Sam.
Yeah, always a blender by nature. It's just always.
Well, a question just came in here. There have been a few questions popping in, but this is some low-hanging fruit. And by low-hanging fruit, I mean this question just popped in, so I'm gonna hop on it right now. And this one, and I'll show it for everybody here. What change in the whiskey industry would you love to see, and what part of whiskey culture do you wish never to change? Who would like to take that one on? There we go. Chris Uhde, front of the class. You brought an apple and everything.
I'm not going to talk about the change, but I will talk about the part of the culture I wish to never change. And it was the part of the culture that drew me into it, and the part of the culture that I find in a lot of people in this screen and in a lot of people making the comments. And that's the excitement of bringing new people into the cult of whiskey, if you will. That feeling that everyone seems to get when they share something that they think is absolutely kick-ass to someone who hasn't had it yet, and the joy that that person gets in finding something new that their friend shared with them. Like those are, I was talking to a friend of mine about, he was looking at the dollar value of his collection versus like the replacement and what he was going to eventually do with it. And I tried to explain to him the value of memories And I took him through, like, how many nights have you been drunk and how many of them do you remember? Now, how many nights do you remember opening a really nice bottle of whiskey with a good friend and you shared some of it, or when someone introduced you to one, and how many of those do you remember? And he just started listing them off: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so that I hope never changes. I hope it never gets dull and it never gets stagnant, that it's always special and emotional, and it brings people together. But as far as what can change, I'll leave that up to the more professionals.
For what could change, for me, it has to be boxes. Could all customers stop wanting boxes? Because boxes they rip and then you have to replace them. I mean, there's just, and they're bad for the environment. I should probably say that too.
Well said. Something tells me, Ollie, that at one point you were in charge of opening all the boxes to put said bottles in. Was that a job you hated at one point?
Much worse. I was in charge of buying the boxes. Honestly, it's the worst job in the history of mankind.
What about you, Ralfy? What is there any part of whiskey culture you'd like to see remain, or maybe let's even change up the question? Is there any part of whiskey culture you'd like to see change?
I think that it's already, Oliver's already mentioned that packaging, excessive packaging. What's happening now is that as whiskey customers mature, particularly when they're self-educating through forums and whiskey clubs and Twitter feeds and Instagram messages, it's amazing how much information people can accrue in a relatively short space of time, which it's not particularly important, but it's lots of little bites of information that make them feel, quite rightly, much more in charge of what they're buying and how they're experiencing it. And the environmental issue is certainly one of importance. The excessive packaging of some bottles of whiskey, it can be perceived as quite entertaining when it's as over the top in some of the grandiose, ultra premium, expensive bottlings. But it's not that long ago that it was Glenfiddich that first introduced the cardboard carton in the first place. And before that, you know, you'll see it at auction, they kind of pop out the really early, the vintage and veteran bottlings of whiskey. They had no boxes at all. In fact, you had all these fine single malts with screw tops. And the Macallan, obvious example. And I think that intelligent packaging, and all credit to Alec and Ardnamurchan, as soon as you go to open the lid of the cardboard box, it disintegrates because it's obviously recycled and fair dues. It's just really a part of the theatre of presenting the bottle. But as times change, the two fundamentals, the two criticals of experience, the calibre of smell and the quality of taste, are increasingly being related to the purchase price of the bottle. And I think that's a very positive, interesting development as customers collectively educate their palates. And it never ceases to surprise me as to how much your ordinary, decent malt make folk can really express themselves with confidence when they're getting their nose and palate round a single malt or any other quality spirits. That's impressive.
Yeah. Well said. It's funny, as I asked you that question, Ralfy, I thought to myself, I've never known James Wills to be this quiet, and then this pops up from Travis Williams. And so now, right, Travis Williams basically weaponized your name. So now I have to call on you to hear your thoughts.
It's a tricky one. I mean, it's not, when I read that question, about change, wasn't anything that really jumped to mind. And And then, you know, the more knowledgeable heads in the room kind of started to make sense of it. But for me, I mean, I think I'm still quite, I sort of see it from both sides, because when I actually got into the industry, it was kind of before I really discovered what to love about it, you know? So I kind of came at it from a different perspective, and I can't think of a lot that, you know, from my side that we would change. I think the big obvious thing is the kind of the environmental impact of the way we make our whiskey. And, you know, there's lots of different elements to that. But I'd say that that's the big priority. And in terms of things I wouldn't change anything about any of the people who come up to me enthusiastically after a tasting and want to shake you by the hand and talk to you endlessly about which Kilchoman they tried first and what they love about, you know, the style of whiskies we make and stuff. So yeah, the passion is always there, but there are certain things behind the scenes I think that can be improved for sure.
Yeah. This popped up, and I want to stay on this point with packaging here. So John Bourne is, you know, like me, he's getting old and his eyes don't work as well as they used to. But I love this comment here. I'd like to see the same information online. I think online allows you to not only put the information that could go on a package, but also allows you to put information that maybe you couldn't put on the package because there's room, or maybe from a legal standpoint, you can't put that on the package. So I wonder, is that something you, and maybe I'll point this question to Alex, and I only point this question to you, Alex, because when I think of the Ardnamurchan bottlings, there's this, you know, crazy, you know, code on there that I've reached out to all of my Russian friends to see if they can crack this code, and I haven't been able to crack it. So, you know, that code means something, and I imagine you explain that on your website. Do you do that, and can you talk about how you may have used that in the past or in the recent past?
Are we talking about the code on the front of the bottle or the back?
Yeah, it's like the 04:/AD2Y. Yeah.
It makes complete sense to us, which is the main thing. No, but talking of codes, so I can actually reverse the bottle and go back to what you're talking about with being able to see things online, and B, getting rid of boxes. I mean, Ralfy, quite rightly, we've come in for a lot of stick about our recycled cardboard boxes. They are there purely just to hold the bottle and keep it safe. They are meant to be a one-use item. And, you know, in Scotland, when we take a cork out of a bottle, it goes straight in the fire. So that's the principle behind it. But on a slightly more serious note, and I'm going to be very brief on this because it tends to bore people when I start talking about blockchain. If you
what's that word again?
Blockchain.
Blockchain. All right. Blockchain. Okay. Continue.
If you scan one of the bottles, you have basically full transparency. So you go into the complete workings of how that bottle of whiskey was made, right down to the name of the person and the time of fermentation, when the malt came in, where the farm is, what the field name is, you name it. And I'm not going to expand on that too much, but just to say that you can put as much information online through a very simple QR code in our case, or a chip or whatever. It's definitely the way forward, I think. And it's something we're going to be using for all our whiskies.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Brilliant. So something popped up here, and this one it's just an extension to the conversation we're having here from Aaron Brasher. Ralfy, what do you have to say about online information and what should be on the bottle itself? Do you want to talk to this a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Alec is making quite a valuable point here when he's talking about blockchain technology. And the whiskey industry, gentlemen, ladies watching, tends to be quite traditional in many respects. And embracing new technology is one of the challenges. And blockchain is, with so many people having mobile devices, it is a very immediate and instant access to information that not just through legal restrictions, but through the size of labels, would get rather compressed if it's put in a bottle. And I think that the basic information should be on the bottle. And if you are needing a magnifying glass, I certainly find them useful myself on a regular occasion for reading the label, particularly if you've got metallic writing, because you've got to catch it in the light just in the right way to read it. And blockchain it's a genuine innovation. It's not just the superficial wand waving of innovations in the category that tends to get bounced out by marketing, well-intentioned marketing people who have to use their script. But to do so is a step on to further connectivity and engagement directly between producer and customer, which brings deeper meaning to the longer term value of the reputation, where the consumer will enter into the whiskey world probably through a Diageo blend or a Chivas Regal, for example, or then if they've had the experience of that, they might move on to perhaps a single malt at some point, and someone hopefully there can explain it to them, so that they're not too intimidated by their first sensory shock, particularly if it's Lefroy. But it can be quite a swift journey, and particularly at the moment during the global pandemic, so many people are stuck in the house, and I've noticed my own audience and traffic to my YouTube channel has grown by over 20%. Now that's fairly significant, because with people at home, they're not in bars, they're not at their whiskey clubs unless they're having a connective virtual meet. They tend to have more time to do their forensic work as regards whiskey. And this is another interesting development, whereas in a previous generation, people would be far more brand loyal. Now people are much more confident at exploring, and not just the different brands, but the different variants within a brand, which is why distillers, particularly independent distillers and independent bottlers, are discovering that when certain cask finishes, for example, work, the interest just explodes in them. So you have this bifurcation. You have the mainstream consumer who will be buying at, say, for example, travel retail or in the supermarket or in a high street specialist wine or spirits shop. And then you have the informed customer. And the depth of that relationship can grow in particular with the tools available through social media and online. And just to conclude, Alec is definitely at Kilchoman, definitely making good steps in the right direction. Phew.
Yeah, James, you're with Kilchoman. You're using the NFC, which is Can you talk about that?
We haven't gone so far as like the blockchain stuff. I think I've been looking at the comments, and some people are saying, like how much information is needed, and we kind of went through this kind of thought process ourselves. How much information is relevant, if you know what I mean. So when you give them the recipe of casks, when you give them the peating level, when you give them the the strength, the fact that it's non-chill filtered, is the number of pieces of peat that you put on the fire when you malted the barley, is that relevant to how the whiskey tastes? So we didn't go so far as the guys at Ardnamurchan with blockchain stuff. We have a sort of portal by which you can either scan a QR code or tap your phone on the back of a bottle, and it opens up a portal, and it has all of the information that we feel is relevant. So it has more than there is on the bottle, and often that means we can communicate things about multiple ages of the casks. I don't know whether we're strictly allowed to do that within that portal or not, but we do it nonetheless, and we feel that's enough. But perhaps we're not going far enough. I'm not sure.
Well, I still don't know how many pieces of peat you're putting on your fire, so you're definitely not going.
Neither do I. Not a clue. Yeah. I've had a few promotions since then, so I'm purely in the drinking end of the industry now, rather than the peat firing.
Do you think that the correlation is? I mean, this is probably more a question for Alex. Do you think the correlation is actually there? So you give that information because people are interested, right? That's why you provide it. People are interested in the information because they believe that there's a correlation between that and flavour, and there is some correlation between that and flavour, but it's not as direct as maybe most consumers might believe. So how many pieces of peat you put on that fire is one of the multitude of things that happened that day. Whether the rugby was on probably made a big difference to the heating level. And unless you're going to put absolutely everything, which is impossible because you can't put the wind on that particular day, and you can't say how this cask had a slight notch in the left side, so actually the impact from the wood was slightly different to the one two down. So you can put all this information, but actually in terms of flavour, it actually gives you limited information. What it tastes like surely is the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, our and I completely take James's take on it as well. And all I would say is our blockchain system was built for us. It was built for our production stock system, our supply chain, and all the rest of it. And the icing on the cake is the fact that we can then open that window, and the person who's got the bottle can then have as much fun looking at it or not, and they can pick out the bits they want. And it's purely just going briefly back to blockchain. Blockchain is a completely incorruptible system. So when you put the information up that you need to give to HMRC at the end of the week on your W1s and all the rest of it, that information then gets stuck there forever and cannot be changed. So we cannot fiddle with it. And that's why it makes such a good system for a relatively new distiller like us.
I should qualify. I really like it. I mean, I'm sad I've got all the information. I guess my always the thing I come back to is when you're bottling single casks of whiskey. I remember getting asked repeatedly by different salespeople for cask numbers. Could you tell me the cask number? And I'd be like, I can tell you the cask number. Is it going to help you? And they'd be like, well, yes. I said, in what way? What are you going to use it for? Like, because unless you happen to have that batch of casks that you can say, oh, well, it's in this batch and they will have these things in common. Frankly, it's just a number. I mean, it's helpful for me in moving it from one place to another. But what it tastes like, it's just a number on the side of the cask. It's not really going to help you. It might help you as a buyer to say, oh, I like that cask. I want to buy that cask number again. So if I'm putting on the packaging, I understand why it's useful. But if it's something that I've got in the background, it's really no good to you.
It's Rain Man information though that we all, as independent bottlers, we all store somewhere here. We know every single cask number that we've ever bottled.
100%.
Honestly, hide it, Alex.
Hey, listen, I want to move on to another question, but I also realized that Keir didn't have a chance to answer this. If you had something to add, please go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off in any way.
The only thing I would kind of say, I'm all for. I was going to say I'm all for transparency. To be honest, I'm all for how does it taste in the glass. I'm a little bit. I get the nth degree, and it doesn't matter what information we tend to give as a distiller. It just leads to another question, and I don't mean that in a bad way. That's a great thing that people are passionate and enthusiastic, but it seems to be a never-ending road. So one of the main challenges that we have, fascinating listening to Alex talking about blockchain, which I've heard of but don't know much about, and James about NCF, if I heard that right. One of the biggest challenges we have is keeping things up to date. We do 3-4 varings, bottlings of GlenAllachie 12-year-old each year. Billy likes to change things. Billy likes to keep striving, making improvements. So if we were to put something on our packaging, it potentially could get out of date fairly quickly. So it's a challenge we have. We've tried to address it with our White Heather blend, which we recently released. And we gave a little infographic with, unfortunately not in the US, guys, but just for the UK and Europe. It will come to the US at some point. For White Heather, Billy did a little infographic of, the grains that was in it, the single malts, the islands, the highlands, what cask it's been in and for how long. And I'm sure someone will still want to know the cask numbers. But anyway, we put as much information as we could. So I hope I've answered that and not got myself in trouble. But I saw one, I think it was Graham made a point. I was thinking back when we were talking about small print. That as a retailer, he would like to go to marketing meetings. I would actually turn that the other way around. And I've said this at quite a few companies, and I've never been popular. I don't think anyone should be allowed into a whiskey marketing department unless they've gone and spent 1 week at least working in a whiskey shop. Genuinely, I think it's until you go and engage directly with, and I keep using the word consumers, but drinkers, people that are actually spending their money on your whiskey. Go and speak to them. That should be a key criteria. It doesn't matter what qualifications you have. Go and work in a whiskey shop, and you'll find the beating heart of what makes this industry so fantastic. The people that are actually love and spend their money on whiskey. So, Graham, a great point. I would turn it around. Go and get marketing people out there on the high street.
I'm voting for you, David. I've got local elections coming up. If you could run, I'll vote for you.
We've got elections coming up in Scotland as well, and they're always very contentious.
So we got a question a little earlier on from Ryan Flanagan, who wants to know, when you choose a single cask or special release for the US market, what factors make you say, oh, this will work in the States? And this is a question which, of course, I'm going to throw at all of our suppliers here, but Sam Filmus plays an integral part in this decision making too. So, geez, I don't know if I should start with Sam or start with maybe James Wells, because he's desperate to answer a question. Look at him; see the desperation on his face.
Okay. I'll go first. Yeah, I mean, for us, we the process of kind of selecting, if you like, a cask for the US or any bottling that because we do a few things that are unique to the US market. It comes down to us. Well, either we trigger the conversation, or the guys, you guys at ImpEx trigger the conversation about what's available. But normally it goes, well, we'll go and have a look and present maybe a reasonable contrast of options to you, and then we leave it in your hands to kind of select what you think is most appropriate. Because, I mean, for us, I think maybe it's different for other suppliers, but we place a lot of trust and hopefully you feel that we trust you and realize and appreciate the knowledge, experience, expertise you as importers bring to us. So we really just narrow down some options, present it to Sam, and he does the rest. And we complain, actually no, we complain a couple of months later that he didn't sell it out quick enough. But other than that, we leave it in his hands.
Sam?
Well, selecting the cask is probably my favorite part of being in this business, because the process itself is unique. The only fear I have is if we like the cask, we're afraid that it's going to get lost into some batch or regular release, core release. So I have palates that I trust. It's like this guy Joshua Hatton or Chris Uhde or Robert Horton, myself sometimes, that we anonymously taste the whiskeys, and we get it through the selection process to pick up the cask that either totally represents the DNA of the distillery, or sometimes it's totally different from what distillery has to offer as a core expression. So next step would be, and people who are at this meeting or this event, they don't know yet, but I'm gonna start bringing some people who are very big enthusiasts of the whiskeys to have this kind of a panel participate in cask selection. So we're lucky that we have these distilleries that allow us to select the cask that shows how far the distillery can go when it comes to quality, the uniqueness. So yeah, it's pretty unique.
I want to open that. Thank you, Sam. I want to open up that question to other people. However, Kelly Patrick Young added a twist to Ryan's question, and let me put that up here. Following on what Ryan had asked about, how do you balance your, I assume, core range versus special releases? And Alex, I hope you don't mind me pointing this at you, but the Ardnamurchan core range is something that you're just developing now. It's something that you're thinking about now. And so I wonder, as you are launching Ardnamurchan around the world, how are you choosing what will be part of your core? How did you develop your core line? And why would you keep certain casks separate from that?
Yeah, really good question, actually. I mean, there's probably two answers to that. One is, unfortunately, I have to keep an eye on a very, very large spreadsheet, which I've developed for monitoring what stock we actually do have. Because as a relatively young distiller, even though we waited a wee bit longer, we waited, a good 6.5 years or 6 years before releasing anything. We've still got a finite number of casks from the early days in 2014. I've got to make sure that we're not selling too much too quickly, which sounds a bit silly. But in terms of how we then go about within that, selecting what goes into the core range and what gets picked out. If I give you an example, the last blending session we did for the latest single malt, which will be coming out to the rest of the world end of this month, we had about 70 cask samples. We needed about 50 for the batch, and we went through them on the nose. We took out ones we didn't think were ready, and we also took out ones that we thought were incredibly individual. And it wasn't so much that they would change the core range, it was just we felt they would be exceptional as single casks or as a limited edition. So the core range, we know what the recipe is now. This will be the 4th time we've done it. We've included yourselves. And we just stick to that. And so far, we've been quite lucky that it seems to be fairly consistent. But yeah, that's how we do it.
Okay. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. I wonder, David or Ollie, if you had anything to add to that. With David, with the GlenAllachie, your core range is all age stated, and I don't think that it differs around the world. But would you, as you're offering casks to the US, or maybe offering casks to Germany or to Poland or wherever, do you think about the casks differently depending on who you're offering the samples to?
Yes, to a certain extent. And I'm being very generic here, very general, but Taiwan, you would kind of think, well, we wouldn't, they're not so keen in maybe something that's been in a red wine cask or a Sterns or something, sherry. But it's a good question. And Sam, I love working with you in single casks, but we have 50,000, almost 50,000 casks of GlenAllachie at the distillery. So when someone says, Sam, will say, look, I've got an accountant that wants a single cask. Magic, Sam, where do we start? Because we've got, so we need to, I think what I'm trying to say is we take a lead a lot. I think I'm going to echo James. We take a lot of a lead from likes of Sam to what do you think would work? Because I could be running reports. We've got reports, Alex. You need to invest a few quid and get a nice report to keep a track of your stock. And it can come out pages and pages. And you know, there's something else. I'm starting to ramble here a little bit, but something else that's interesting about our casks. Of all those casks we've got, I can run a report to Sam's criteria now, and then I can go to Billy, and Billy has his Bible, which is folders, which he carries under his arm. If you ever see Billy walking around with A4 folders stuck under his arm, that's the Bible where every cask has been rated. So I can actually go, and a bit like what you were saying, Alex, about that one's not ready, that's very good. I can check it with against Billy's tasting notes before we then progress to the next stage. But picking single casks is fantastic, but it's a lot of fun and it's a lot of work as well. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Joshua.
Yeah, no, that's good.
David, if you could tell my boss that picking single casks is a lot of work, that'd be really good for me. It'd be good for pay review. So you just keep on saying that.
It is.
I guess.
Sorry.
I guess from our perspective, it's slightly different because obviously we don't just sit on one distillery stock and what we made. Quite the opposite, obviously. Although we have a similarity to Alex in terms of if we're doing Askaig 100 proof or 8-year-old, then we're doing batches of about 50 casks. It's the magic number. It's what fits on a wagon, so it's really efficient. Good efficient number to move. And when I do that, I've got excess casks, and we do offer those out as single casks. The flip side is it's when we're buying stock. So you get lucky. Someone offers up some 30-year-old Isla for peanuts, so I can sell that to the US and make loads of money, and everyone's really happy. Happens every week, obviously. So our view is slightly different. I would say that there are definitely casks you look at for specific markets. Exactly as David said, there are markets have profiles that they like or they prefer that sell well in those markets. I've yet to figure out what the US profile is. It's just such a big place. So again, it's a lot of reliant on you guys. So far, what I figured out is it has to taste really nice. And there's a certain amount of showing off. I don't know if anyone else does that, but basically I'm always just trying to make Sam, Joshua and Chris, I'm just trying to show off basically. What they don't know is I sell crap around the back to everyone else, just making us look fancy.
So at that, I would just say, you're trying to figure out the profile of the United States. Hold up a mirror, look at yourself very closely when you think about what your profile is, and it's basically the same thing. Because I've seen what you've bottled, and as a consumer, I've bought what you've bottled for a long time. And I would argue that you're the exact same, man. You're all over the place, and all of it's got to taste really nice. So have a good look in that mirror.
Chuff. Everyone in the US likes to look at me. Fantastic. Great.
When it comes to single malts of Scotland selection, first it goes through your lips. So it's very difficult to prove you wrong after we get the samples to taste. And we don't mind that European markets get some samples as long as ours are better. So
Bobby Bird kind of took this question and added another wrinkle to it. I thought that this was pretty good. Is there a fine line between selecting for the market and possibly becoming too consistent versus possibly sacrificing, offering interesting and unique bottles to true enthusiasts? I think what he's asking there is, you can pick good casks, right? That's nowadays, I think the consistency of whiskey has improved. There have been obviously epic whiskeys from, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s Bowmore. Ollie, that's my heart and soul right there. But my point is modern. Go ahead.
I am drinking Bowmore right now just because you sent me a bottle. So there's not it's not community.
But whiskey, the way it's made now, is a bit more consistent when it comes to quality. You're overall, you're getting a better quality. Do you hesitate when it comes to that unusual cask? And James, I'm going to throw this one at you, and I hope you don't mind. I'm thinking of last year's Fino cask, which to me was A, delicious, but B, it was a very strange Kilchoman because it brought flavors to Kilchoman that I hadn't really tasted. I thought that the texture was much different than most other Kilchomans. And so obviously I think Kilchoman has kind of made a name for themselves in releasing unusual stuff. So you haven't steered clear from that. Maybe this gets back to that original question of independence, right? Is this something you look to do, to offer up that unusual expression?
I think we're always looking for something that'll give our spirit a little bit of a, something a bit new, something a bit different in terms of character. I think we also feel that the spirit that we produce stands up pretty well to virtually any cask that we've filled into. We have reasonably small stocks compared to others, so we can keep a close eye on stuff as well. So yeah, I think, actually in terms of like, the spirit we produce, it's a pretty tight flavor profile. But I think with that flavor profile, it's got real sort of foundation to then put in lots of different casks, and Fino being one of them. If you sort of SDR cask we've used gives something quite different as well, I think. But I also think we're not afraid to, the Fino wasn't something I liked at all, to be quite totally honest. I think I'm in the minority, for sure, it seems, because people seem to think it's delicious. But we're not necessarily apprehensive about putting that out there. We feel there's quality to it, and it's thrown out there, and we see what happens, kind of thing. I don't think it's a particularly scientific approach to a lot of our thinking. I think what's come across when I listen to other people talk in the industry is we maybe kind of not a bit more instinctive, but just like we kind of go with the flow a little bit, and like if some stuff works, great. If some stuff doesn't work, no problem. We got more.
Yeah. James, we've got so much whiskey we've been going for.
We had that very conversation today, James. Billy, myself, and a couple of other guys talking about some new casks we've got in, and Billy was like, "Let's put it in, see how it comes. If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. Let's just try it and see where it takes a whiskey."
I'm going to take this question and I'm going to throw it at Ralfy. One of the things, and I should have known it was 12 years, Ralfy, but I think I discovered you in 2010 rather than 2009. But I think one of the things that drew me to you is that in a way I saw a bit of me in you, in that you are looking to discover flavor, and you're looking for inspiration within a whiskey, and you're looking to be not just satisfied by whiskey, but wowed by whiskey, and you want to share that. And I'm curious, from your standpoint as maybe a fellow whiskey enthusiast, would you like to see more uniqueness, maybe even oddball sorts of whiskeys that kind of take you out of your comfort zone? Do you like it to be more focused on quality all the time?
I would start by saying that one of the fascinations about whiskey in particular, although it applies for all spirits, is the rich tapestry of sensory experience through smell and taste, which are our most subjective senses. To have a complex flavor, particularly when you're starting out, you don't want too much eccentricity or singularity or individuality. So to start and get your bearings with, say, a Glenfiddich 12-year-old, it's a great place to start. It's a relatively simple whiskey, and in terms of single malts profiles, it's designed as such, and it works very well as such. And it helps one gets one bearing because to dive straight into a single cask strength whiskey from an independent distiller, it can be really quite intimidating and can be too much of a shock for the senses and end up being off-putting. But the skill is to take the journey slowly, a self-imposed apprenticeship, which we sustain over years and decades. And in fact, whether we're drinking alone or drinking in company, whether we're in a whiskey club or we just have a little whiskey niche, whether we're out and about or in our own little whiskey cave, it adds a tremendous emotive substance to the quality of our lives. And that in the same way that we can walk into an art gallery and we can look at the art on the wall and we may be entertained by it and ridicule some of the exhibits, but what we see is very different to what a trained, experienced artist will see. They will see the gradations of color, the contrasts of color with much more experienced sight. Likewise, musicians can go to a concert, an orchestral concert, and they will pick out the bum note from the trumpet, which goes right over the head of the average concert goer. But it's purely through the immersion in the experience over time, which is its own substantial reward, which brings us to these more exotic single cask versions, which can be a bit of a reach for our wallets. But we anticipate the skill, and it's so important, the experience of the production team at a distillery to use their rational decision-making process is in conjunction with instincts to know when a specific bottle will go out there, someone will buy it, they'll experience it and never forget it. And we've all had that experience.
Yes,
How was that? Was it rather, I think I was getting a little bit, waxing a little bit lyrical there. But hey, be honest, guys, what's the time? It's 2:47 in the morning, and I'm just on a couple of whiskeys, and frankly, I'm quite enjoying the experience. It's unusual for me. I'm usually snoring by this time.
Well, I wouldn't blame you if you started anytime soon. I'd be okay with that.
I wouldn't do that. It would be rude.
I wonder if anybody else had anything to add. If not, there was a question that was asked here that I think would be a great closing question, because we're at the 12-minute mark. In other words, we have 12 minutes left before this shuts down. So I don't want to cut anybody off. So if you have anything to add, please do so. I'm looking at you, David. I'm looking at you, Holly.
I would add Ralfy's point there about the apprenticeship, etc. When I've been in the warehouses with Billy tasting casks, and I think there's something not right here. It's just not right. Billy will do exactly the same. And Billy knows through experience that apprenticeship what wood to put that cask in to bring that whiskey to put the missing building blocks in to get the full flavour profile. And that is just sheer experience and knowledge of what cask will work with which style of whiskey.
Yeah. Just as you were mentioning that, I was taking a sip of my whiskey, and it reminded me of a point that I wanted to make, and it's piggybacking a little bit on what James had said earlier when we were talking about Kilchoman Fino, where James, you didn't particularly like that, but other people did, and there's a host of people on here saying, "Oh, I loved it. When the Kilchoman Madeira release came out, I want to say that was 2014 or 15, somewhere around there. I know the cask numbers, I just don't know the year. Anyway, I didn't particularly love that release. In fact, to this date, it's one that I never connected with. There are people that loved it. I didn't like it really at all. And so from that point, I said to myself, I just don't like Kilchoman and Madeira. And I had it in my head that I don't like Kilchoman and Madeira. And then I picked up this one. This is for Warehouse Liquors. So this is a Madeira finish, an 8-year-old, and I think it was finished for about a year or so in Madeira. And that was my whiskey of the year last year. So Kilchoman and Madeira went from likely my least favorite to my most favorite. So, you know, just as a whiskey lover, I would urge people to not stay stuck in your ways. If you didn't like something previously, maybe your palate's changed, or maybe this other cask is doing something different, or this selection of other casks is doing something different. You never want to discount something just because of a bad experience or an experience that didn't settle with your palate. Last question that I'm going to open up to everyone, and this is from Johnny at Whiskey and Donuts. He says, as gentlemen, which we're going to use that term loosely, guys, with extreme passion and knowledge for single malt, beyond the fuzzy feeling caused when consuming it, what continues to fuel your whiskey romance? And I'm actually going to throw that question at Chris Uhde, because Chris is one of, you know, I knew of you before I was with ImpEx, and I knew of you because all of my California friends who knew you said, oh, Chris, he's the whiskey guy. He knows his shit. And so, like, what is it? And that was years ago. What continues to fuel your passion for whiskey?
It never change. It never stops changing. It's always like you look at what any of these guys are going to put out, and then you look at what any of these guys are going to put out in 5 years, and it'll be the same. It'll have the same backbone, but it'll also be different. Like I'm drinking this Glenburgie 21. I can't do the camera thing, which is an absolute fruit bomb from Ollie, and it's I didn't think fruit bombs were possible, right? Like I mean, I knew they were, but they had kind of diminished. Mark Watt made the comment about the 80s but more, where it had shifted, and now it's kind of back, and it's just. It's always a moving target, so it never gets dull. A lot of things get dull. Like we get older, our palates change, and everything gets dull, but whiskey never gets dull. It's always changing for better, for worse. And then you have these young kids coming in on the comments, and they like completely different types of whiskey, and they're absolutely right. And I just love being a part of all of that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's great. Sam, what about you?
Well, Joshua, getting to your previous point about disliking or liking whiskeys, I remember us being at the distillery about 2011 or 2012, and Anthony asked me to taste this Madeira that was only like 2 years or something. I didn't like it, and I told him straight in the face, like this, and all of a sudden it became one of my favorite Kilchoman expressions. By the way, we have Madeira coming in towards the end of the year, so no matter how much you like or dislike Madeira, you have to sell it. But I agree with you. With the James cask, it's a really, really, huge. That's what I think, to Chris's point, we always see these developments, these discoveries. There's something that is waiting for us right around the corner. And that's what I like about the whiskey in this industry.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. What about you, Alex? Because you've been at this for quite a while yourself. What continues to fuel your passion for whiskey?
You can tell the alcohol consumption's been constant. No, well, first of all, can I just make a point? Whoever asked that question actually only had gentleman. It wasn't gentlemen.
Oh, that's a good question. As gentleman. Oh shit, he could be talking about anybody. He might not even be talking about anyone in this room. Wow. Okay.
So no, my overriding reason for still being in the industry after all these years is I just love when you pick up a glass of whiskey. I mean, I've got this quite old one tonight, but when you pick up a glass of whiskey for the first time or smell a cask for the first time, it triggers a memory. That's what it's trying to do. You know, when we're sitting together in a pub or in a house or whatever, we're discussing what it smells like, what it tastes like, where we had that before, that experience. And that's what I love about Scotch whiskey. I mean, I love wine, I love other things too, but Scotch whiskey is really good at doing that. And I think we had last week we bought a 20 something. Oh no, it was last month. We bought this old Springbank, which you don't see very often now in the independent market, and it just summed up old-fashioned whiskey, and in that kind of Campbelltown way. It was diesel engines leaking into the loch. It was bung cloth, all these lovely kind of things that you smelt somewhere before, and it's triggered it. So that is what keeps me in the game. But I would also say that as we have started the journey of distilling, I've been really passionate and really fascinated by just the whole journey from literally from field to bottle. And it's taken 6 and a bit years, but I've seen every single step of it. And that's been, just really fascinating, really interesting.
Yeah. I really like what you said about memories, and I'll share this really quickly. What turned me on to whiskey initially, I was at my synagogue of all places, and after the Friday night services, we had a fellow congregant in the social hall who would always bring a few bottles of whiskey with him. And just if you wanted to try whiskey, he'd pour you a little whiskey, and everybody's happy. Praise God. And so he said, what would you like to drink? And I'd said, well, what do you have? And he said, I didn't know anything about whiskey at the time. And he said, well, do you like sweet or smoky? And I'd said, I didn't even know smoky could exist in a drink. Can I try that? And so he poured me some Lagavulin 16, and it wasn't what I noticed off the bat upon smelling it wasn't what it smelled like. I was immediately brought back to camping with my father. I smelled the campfire. I smelled the earth floor. I smelled the dampness in the air, right? It instead of getting me from point A to point B, just feeling normal to feeling a little happy, it brought me back in time to 1980 something. And that was really special to me, and that's what started my whiskey journey, and that's what kind of continues mine. So I really liked what you said there, Alex. I thank you for that. Mr. Chilton, what drives you? What drives your passion?
So a little bit of what you've pretty much all said. Though more and more, after lambasting the point of putting cast numbers and information on bottles, I actually love, and I find the most interest in my day-to-day job currently is a kind of relation to science. I was listening to some physicists on the radio, because I'm that age that I now listen to Radio 4 nonstop. I'm a sad man. And there was a big discovery, possible new discovery today. And I think what I love about whiskey is exactly that. We don't know. We don't know why things taste exactly the way they do. We think we've got some pretty good ideas. We think we understand the science. We understand it enough to create certain flavors. But all of the oddities, and this kind of goes back to Chris and his vast selection and change, all those oddities, and we can't pin down exactly why. And I think that's what makes whiskey special, because you can, there's no other category in the world, and this is specific. Yes, global whiskey is really interesting. Scotch whiskey, you've got over 125 distilleries, all in different locations, producing marginally different ways every day. So that you have to bear that in mind. It's not that they're producing in different way, they're all producing in different ways. No, every day is slightly different because the weather's slightly different, and all of these little factors make a change, as much as some companies might say they don't. And then we're going to wait 5, 10, 15 years and we're going to put it in wood, and each piece of wood is going to be different. And all this is going to do is it's going to compound all of these differences. I love the fact we don't control that yet. And I love the human endeavor to try and control it. I think that's what makes it so, it's the most extreme example of the human condition, trying to control the uncontrollable. and I'm taking massive pleasure on a day-to-day basis in trying to understand, whether it's on the cask buying independent bottle side, in trying to understand what was happening in the distillery 30 years ago. What were the factors driving? Does Kalila from 79 to 84 taste particularly fruit-driven because it was a 4 million litre distillery at a time when nobody wanted whiskey?
Yeah.
Is that a driving force for the flavour? And what were the economic / production impacts of that? Through to designing a distillery and trying to make decisions on the basis of what we want to make in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time. That for me is the fascination, because you can never, there's no end to that.
Right.
But there's so much pleasure in trying to find the end. And yeah, I was listening to all the scientists this morning, and one of the physicists said that was the joy, is that next week we'll discover something that's going to disprove everything we thought was true, and it'll start a whole new journey. And I think that makes whiskey by far and away the most interesting drink, product, thing that humans have invented so far.
Yeah, it's kind of like a cat chasing its tail. He'll never catch it, but he still does it because it's fun.
Yeah, apart from cats are evil and whiskey's amazing. But yeah, apart from that.
Those are fighting words, but Mr. Keir?
I just love it, Josh, and I don't mean that in such a trite way. I was thinking, how would I answer this? Before I started as a part-time sales assistant in the whisky shop in Edinburgh, mid-90s. I'd been an electrician, I'd worked in forestry. Then I went to university. A part-time job, just saw the advert in the window, applied for a job, got it. And within about 2 days, I was like, wow, this is what I want to do with myself. This is what I want to do. The people coming in, the interaction with people, there could be someone coming in, a great customer coming in from Taiwan, would come in and he'd leave his driver at the door, walk round, buy 2 bottles of everything, all the top range stuff, one for his office, one for his home. Lovely, lovely chat. The innovation then, there was Bell's Red Devil. We're talking about big companies and what they can do. Does anybody actually remember Bell's Red Devil? It was made by United Distillers, predecessor of Diageo. It was Bell's 8-year-old, I think, or maybe it didn't have the age statement. Coloured red and chili peppers. So there was that going on the whiskey side. There was Port Ellen, the first Port Ellen release, sitting on the shelf at £65 sterling. It was all happening. The whiskey hadn't got as fashionable, as popular. It was just great. And then going to things like always go to work, think, am I actually getting paid for this? And then time went on, going out to distillery visits and sitting with out in Bowmore Pier at 2 in the morning. It was just like, am I getting paid for this? I just love it. I hope I'm trying to cover off. It was just, this is what I want to do. So there was that side of it. And the other side of it, I think, is the people. Right from my very, very first days in the industry. I'm glad to see you back, Alex. Have you put some money in the meter? Yeah.
I did. I had to transfer to backup.
The people back in those days. If we had a customer that walked into the whiskey shop looking for a specific bottle, maybe a Lagavulin cask 4,599,000, and we didn't have that particular cask number in stock, I would phone up Royal Mile Whiskies up the road to Arthur, Keir. We don't have this. Can you help this customer out? And if they had it, we'd send them up. There was no rivalry. And that's followed right through to this day. The gentleman here, or gentleman, and the rest of them that have joined me tonight. I could phone them up and say, look, we've got a customer that's got a question or a query, or an import or an event. Should we do this whiskey festival? And I can guarantee each and every one of them here, and many, many others in the industry, would give me an honest answer and a helpful answer. And there would be no regard for competitors or any of that kind of nonsense. So to summarise, I absolutely love the industry, my whole job. I still have to pinch myself every morning. And the people, and working with you lovely gentleman-ish in the USA, working with great importers all around the world, getting to travel. What's not to like?
These are all very valid points.
Thank you.
Mr. Wills, what about you? What keeps your passion for whiskey alive?
I'm all about the money, you know.
Finally, an honest answer. Finally.
I can't wait for my dad to eventually, you know, kick the bucket. I'm going to put Kilchoman up for sale to the highest bidder. I'm going to retire to my yacht in the Caribbean.
Two things just I want to pick up on. Firstly, Joshua, I take massive insult. I work for Sekinder saying it's never about the money. And get a bid in for that. I mean, don't
Yeah. You give a serious answer now, Joshua. I hope you didn't want one of them.
Oh,
No, I don't.
that wasn't serious. Okay, got it. Yeah, please. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Here's my serious answer is that, well, I mean, what could be better than, you know, spending time in a warehouse with your dad, learning about why whiskey tastes a certain way and why another cask tastes a different way. So, yeah, I mean, spending time on Islay with the people who are so passionate about what they do. Yeah, I mean, what wouldn't drive passion in other people?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. You're so lucky to. I really envy, and Ralfy, I'm going to get to you in a second, but I really envy you guys. I mean, well, Ollie, you're in London or just outside of London, so you don't have direct access to these warehouses. But I mean, these other guys will just, you know, walk through a door and there you go. You've walked into heaven. You know, that's a thing to wake up for. Kind of like that.
It's very cold though, isn't it? I mean, I'm just making myself feel better. It is really cold. Tell me it's really cold, right?
The one downside, it's really cold.
The whiskey will taste shit when it's cold anyway. So
we don't get very good broadband connections either.
So, Ralfy, we'll close the session with you. What continues to drive your passion for whiskey?
The singularity of the experience. With whiskey, we start out on a journey. We don't know where it's going. We don't know what we will encounter. But what we do discover along the route is this fascinating fanfare of flavors, experiences, and good company of interesting, like-minded people. And in doing so, the quality of what we experience helps us to recalibrate the quality of our lives.
Mm.
Well, that stopped everything, didn't it?
But right, isn't that it's such a perfect comment, because think about the many reasons that we pour a whiskey. Sometimes you're just done with your day and you want that friend in your glass, right? And sometimes you're celebrating something, or sometimes, well, not me. I can never drink when I'm upset, but some people do it like, I need this, and they'll pour Kilchoman, or they'll pour an Ardbeg, or whatever, because it's like whiskey. But at each and every time, you have a singular purpose for drinking that whiskey, and it's to better that moment or to commemorate that moment. So yeah, I really appreciate that comment, and I appreciate all your comments, and I also appreciate that it's 3:09 in the morning.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, mate. I'm quite enjoying myself. There's plenty of time for sleep later. I'll probably have another couple of drums before I call it quits. And it's actually been quite a lively session. I wasn't quite sure what to expect. And I noticed David hasn't actually mentioned that a Ralfy bottling is in the pipeline. I did this in the 10th anniversary. It was a wine show in Glasgow, and David was there serving whiskey on behalf of GlenAllachie, which was really handy. And I said, well, it's my 10th anniversary coming up and I've not been sued yet, which is great. And he suggested, well, why don't we bottle something to celebrate it? I said, okay, fire away. I tell you what, GlenAllachie, good call, the right sort of distillery. Leave it to Billy. Let Billy just choose whatever cask he wants and put my name on it and just make a donation to a local charity in the local community where you know that people are seriously going to benefit from it. And if I can just buy 3 or 4 bottles, I'll be happy. And they came back to me shortly thereafter and says, American market would like a cask for themselves. And I said, fine, leave it, Billy. Let Billy, he knows his cask better. There's no point in me picking anything because I haven't received my sample yet, David. But no worries.
It's here, Ralfy. It's my fault.
It?
My fault.
No worries. I trust you to get on with it.
I know.
So
I just love Ralfy. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I love that you waited a full hour and 41 minutes to air grievances. That's really well done.
Yes,
it's my fault.
Because it's got more impact at the end of towards the end of the session, you know.
I know.
But yeah, that is exciting. There will be a Ralfy GlenAllachie coming to the U.S. at a later date. Hopefully, you'll get to taste it before it actually gets into the States, though, Ralfy. I'm sure David will take care of it.
Absolutely. We have the sample here, Joshua, just to send down and for Ralfy to give his seal of approval that he's happy with Billy's choice. And I guess I would like to blame COVID, bank holidays, all sorts of things for not getting off my backside and getting that sample posted to you, Ralfy. My apologies.
For me, some. I mean, I'll put my stamp of approval. I'm sure Alex would do the same. If you just send a sample.
If I'm allowed to, I know we're finishing up. A very quick one though. Just after Billy bought Benrir, he said, "Why don't I pop in and taste some casks with them?" And so I did, and we went through about 35 amazing casks of Benrir. Some of the old peated stuff in port, just stunning. And I kind of assumed that he'd invited me so that maybe I could buy a few for Adelphi. So on the way out the door, I said to Billy, they were all amazing. Can I buy these? I think it was 10 or something like that. And he said, let me think about it. And he came back about a month later and he said, you can have 2. all that work just to get 2 glass. It was amazing.
Alex, you were very, very lucky. We get asked all the time, can we buy casks? And there's another new independent bottler in town, the Alistair Walker Whisky Company, which is closely related to our master. That independent bottler tried to purchase some casks from GlenAllachie, and he got told, no, you're not getting any. So you got 2, Alex.
Can I have some? Just so you can have some, all right.
Yeah, Ollie and I are curious. Listen, I do need to let you guys go to sleep. So I'm going to do that. If you don't mind, I'm just going to run through the calendar of events, and then that's coming up. And actually, Ollie, I know that you're coming back for one. And Alex, you may or may not be coming back for one. You may have Connell staying up late for one of them.
Yeah, we may have an issue for that one.
Oh, he told me about that. We can talk. We can take that offline, as they say, as the kids say. So the next session we've got coming up will be Wednesday, April 21st. Same bat time, same bat channel, and that one will be focusing on our rums, on our gin and umishu. So Ollie, maybe you'll be back for I know Mitch Wilson will be there. You're more than welcome if you want to lend a voice.
I'll go and talk about rum. Why not? Sounds fun.
There we go. On May. What's that?
It's rubbish compared to whiskey, given the current chat.
We'll leave it there. May 5th, we'll be going over some of our brands, our world whiskey brands. So Penderyn, Milk and Honey, Golden Carolus, Matsui. On May 19th, we'll be looking at our Japanese whiskeys. So Kuriyoshi, Totori, Oishi, Fukano, and maybe some other surprises. And then finally on June 2nd, we'll be focusing on independent bottlers. And that's the one that Alex may or may not be showing up to, or someone else may or may not be showing up to. But I was just thinking, and I hope you guys don't mind, Sam has been quiet for a little while. So I wonder, Sam, I didn't know if there's anything that you wanted to end on.
Well, first of all, I want to say to Ralfy that your previous cast that was brought by Monique Huston and her wonderful team was a big, big success. Actually, one of the customers just wanted all of it. We gave it to them. I regretted about it, but even by now, I'm getting inquiries about this cask. So I'm very happy and excited about you working with Billy and David on getting another cask. And especially what makes me feel so great is that it's part of the charity that we're, dedicating to out of this cask. So I'm on the waiting list as you are from David to get the samples. We're going to beat him from both sides. I wanted to thank Joshua for putting this together. I want to thank everyone who participated today as special guests. And most importantly, I want to thank everyone who joined tonight's or today's event. And I couldn't be happier. It's just thank you all. Stay safe. We love you. Let's continue rocking.
You're welcome.
Beautiful. A lovely sentiment to end on. Gentleman, you get to choose which one of you is the actual gentleman. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. I'm being serious. It means a lot. I know staying up late is never fun. I'm well past my bedtime, so I don't know how you guys are doing it. Thank you all so much. It's been lovely spending time with you, talking about whiskey and pontificating, as the kids say. And we'll see you all soon. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.
Good pleasure. Thank you. Ryan Flanagan keeps asking about port. There is a port cask in the USA. Ryan. Speak to ImpEx. You will be able to get it. Cheers.
I love shameless plugs. Well done, David.
Three times Ryan has asked, and I thought I don't want to mention it about it, but I put him out of his misery.
Yep. Well done. Yeah. 14-year-old port cask, and it's just it's like a bowl of fruit salad. It's just a lovely, lovely GlenAllachie.
Cheers. Thank you, Joshua. Sam, thank you all very much.
Cheers. Thank you, everybody. Good night or good morning.
Good morning.